Well, welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. Well, the Supreme Court got it right. But, you know, in the news today, you see this thing, judge orders president to take 30 days to reunite children with parents. District court judge has got no authority to order the president to do anything. And I get so tired of the arrogance of these district court judges. I wonder when they're going to exercise the restraint that is given them in the Constitution. They recognize they cannot order the president to do anything. A district court judge cannot order a president to do anything. Now, they can put out all the decrees they want to, but it's ineffective. But nevertheless, they do it, and they get a lot of publicity, so that's what you're dealing with. But today, the Supreme Court knocked down a series of lower court rulings that was reaffirmed by the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit is the most left-wing circuit in the judiciary. It has been overruled more times than any of the circuits. And the Supreme Court handed the president a big political victory on Tuesday by upholding his so-called travel ban. It also showed that the power to pick Supreme Court justices may be the most important role the president plays.
That the court ruled that it's within the president's power to restrict travel for citizens of countries deemed dangerous to America. As Dale Hurd reports, the split decision angered some on the courts.
It was a big win for Donald Trump and what some are calling a resurgent conservative majority. And it was a dark day for opponents of the travel ban. Moments after the decision, President Trump tweeted, "Supreme Court upholds Trump travel ban. Wow."
It's a very strong victory.
The court ruled that the president has the power to regulate immigration. Constitutional law professor Dr. Bradley Jacobs says this wouldn't have been a court case had it not been for the president's comments on the campaign trail.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
If you look at the policy, just the policy, you say, of course it's constitutional. Of course it's legal under the statute. There's absolutely nothing wrong. It's the fact that while he was campaigning, he was giving speeches about how he was going to ban Muslims. He was going to keep Muslims out of this country. Well, the Constitution tells us you can't treat people differently just because of their religious views.
Justice Sotomayor, who opposed the ban, said the administration created the strong perception that the ban is contaminated by impermissible bias against Islam and its followers. But the ban does not restrict travel from the world's largest Muslim nations and includes two non-Muslim nations, North Korea and Venezuela. Yet Muslim groups treated it as a blanket ban on all Muslims entering the country.
What this means for my community as a Muslim right now is that we don't belong here. We're not allowed in this country.
Shame on you to take us back decades ago to the Dark Ages.
Just minutes after the ruling, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell shared this image on Twitter of himself shaking hands with Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch, who voted to uphold the ban. McConnell blocked the nomination of former Obama Supreme Court nominee Merrick Garland in 2016. Which allowed President Trump to nominate Gorsuch.
I think perhaps the most important thing a president does in most cases is appoint members of the Supreme Court and the federal judiciary generally. It is a function that will impact our nation for decades.
As one legal expert put it, even if you don't like Donald Trump personally, if you're conservative, be thankful that he's picking judges. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Thanks, Dale. You know, he has vetted his judges with the Federalist Society, and he's got some tremendous picks. And it looks like there's one judge, or maybe two, that are going to retire. If there's a swing justice who, retires, there will be a solid 5-4 majority for conservative points of view. Justice Kennedy may well step down this summer. We don't know that. There's some rumor about it. But if he is replaced, then he's been a swing vote on many of these cases, especially having to do with homosexuality and gay marriage. But we'll see what happens. But the Supreme Court has had such an enormous impact on us. But the Constitution, if you read it carefully, does not give the judiciary that much power. Jefferson warned a long time ago about the encroachment of the federal judiciary, that it could become a tyranny. And he said, you know, this is tyrannical, and I'm not going to stand for it. But nevertheless, we've had it. We've had a tyranny of unelected judges. Like it or not, it's been that way. And most of them have been graduates of Harvard Law School or Yale Law School, and they've been nurtured in a rather liberal environment. So you've got now Alito. Alito was a graduate of Yale Law School, but the Yale law professors opposed him. Can't believe that, but that's the way they are. And nevertheless, you've got Sotomayor, you've got Kagan, who were Harvard Law School people. And, you know, I just think the time has come for another or two. If we have one or two more judges, like Justice Thomas, it'll be game over. And I think that's why when they took away the so-called nuclear option, when the Democrats did away with it, that means a simple majority of senators can put in the next, can confirm the next Supreme Court justice. So it's going to be very, very important who controls the Senate. Well, in other news, pro-life and free speech supporters celebrated another decision by the High Court. Charlene Aaron, has more on that story from the CBN newsroom. Here's Charlene.
That's right, Pat. Supreme Court justices sided with pro-life pregnancy centers fighting a California law that forced them to inform patients about abortion. CBN's Ben Kennedy has the story.
Well, there was no doubt a victory for pro-life after the Supreme Court ruled that in the Golden State, pregnancy centers no longer have to advertise for abortions.
Oh, we are so happy today. We're delighted with this victory. They will no longer be forced into speech, and it's a victory for the women who go to these pregnancy resource centers.
The law required pregnancy centers to tell clients abortions are available at little or no cost. The mostly Christian-based centers felt the law forced them to deliver a message against their beliefs.
We know the reality is Planned Parenthood and NARAL, as you can hear, they're leading an all-out assault on these life-affirming centers.
Trust women! Trust women!
Opponents argue women must be told about all available options.
Women, we cannot have full freedom without autonomy over our body, and that means abortion rights.
Now, the ruling was close, 5-4. What does that tell you?
I think it just tells me that the issue, one of the issues involved women and abortion, and perhaps those on the left wanted to be on the other side with regard to what the specific issue is. But overall, this ruling is broad in that it affirms precedent that says all Americans have the right to express messages consistent with their convictions.
Now the ruling goes into effect right away, and it could also affect similar laws in other states. Ben Kennedy, CBN News, Washington.
And what a great win, Pat.
Well, I appreciate, I thought it was going to be 7-2. I must say I was wrong. I thought it would be so, because it has to do with free speech, and the Supreme Court has been very strong on free speech issues. This is requiring a group to speak in favor of something they oppose. And that kind of restriction it just violates the First Amendment and the whole meaning of the Bill of Rights. So 5-4 is a great victory. I thought it was going to be 7-2, but nevertheless, there's a win. And what that did is told California and other states, you cannot force people to endorse a procedure that they disagree with. And that's what they were asking them to do. You've got to advertise in your pro-life centers that there's abortion available. And that's what the law of California said, and the Supreme Court said no way.
Praise the Lord.
Praise the Lord.
Hey, a win is a win. We'll take it, right?
All right. Well, there's something else that's going to be a shocker. New Yorkers were shocked at the recent election of a socialist candidate. Charlene has that.
That's right, Pat. A 28-year-old Bernie Sanders supporter won a stunning victory in Tuesday's Democratic congressional primaries in New York. Democratic socialist Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez decisively beat 10-term incumbent Congressman Joe Crowley. He was considered a possible replacement for Nancy Pelosi as Democratic House Speaker. Ocasio-Cortez's victory could expose a generational divide among Democrats as younger voters push the party to the left. In Utah, Mitt Romney easily won the Republican nomination to run for the seat of retiring Senator Orrin Hatch. And in South Carolina, Republican Governor Henry McMaster held off a challenge from businessman John Warren. President Trump endorsed both Romney and McMaster. And President Trump's national security advisor John Bolton will meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin today to plan for an expected summit between the two leaders next month. Some question if the meeting would actually happen because Bolton has been critical of Russia in the past. And the Washington Post reports that in April, he called Russia's interference in U.S. elections an act of war. Well, for the third straight day, thousands of Iranians marched through Tehran to protest their government and terrible economic conditions. As Chris Mitchell reports, Israeli leaders are taking this opportunity to speak directly to the Iranian people.
Social media video documented the protest. Shopkeepers shut down Tehran's Grand Bazaar. Others filled the streets near Iran's parliament, where police shot tear gas into the crowds. Some shouted, "Leave Syria, think about us." These demonstrators even shouted, "Death to Palestine." Mike Ansari of Mohabbat TV told CBN's George Thomas the dissatisfaction of Iranians runs deep.
Most Iranian families are facing great economic hardship. The prices of milk, eggs, meat, bread has skyrocketed. Yet Iranian people are witnessing the government investing millions of dollars in expensive, regional disputes in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, to increase its regional influence while they're going hungry.
Iran's economy is reeling. Prices are rising. The currency is falling and has lost almost half its value in 6 months. Now the economy is bracing for renewed sanctions after the U.S. pulled out of the nuclear deal with Tehran. In the midst of these demonstrations, Israeli leaders spoke directly to the Iranian people. Israel's defense minister asked them where their money is going, while Prime Minister Netanyahu turned to the World Cup and to soccer.
Can you imagine how hard it is to stop Ronaldo from scoring a goal? But the Iranian team just did the impossible. To the Iranian people, I say, you showed courage on the playing field, and today you show the same courage in the streets of Iran.
It's unclear where these demonstrations will end up, but some hope they could eventually lead to a regime change.
No dictatorship stands for a long period of time, even if they disguise themselves with so-called free election. It will happen, maybe in a year, maybe in 5 years, maybe in decades. The question is how much damage this regime would cause until it will disappear from earth.
One day I'll hope to watch Iran's soccer team go head-to-head against Israel in a free Tehran. On that day, we'll all be winners.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Pat, back to you.
You know, I've been predicting something like this would happen. There's an artificial control by a theocracy in Iran. The Iranian people have had enough of it. It was imposed when Ayatollah Khomeini came into power at the fall of the Shah. And now it's time that the Iranian people want to be free. And fortunately, you know, we've broken out of that terrible agreement that Obama had set up with the Iranians. And the sanctions are biting because their oil exports have fallen dramatically. And the United States is trying to bring those exports down to zero. When that happens, the flow of hard currency into Iran is going to be stifled. And the Iranian economy is just reeling. The Iranian currency has lost about 40% of its value, and that whole country is hurting. And out of that, we would hope that those wonderful people in Iran would say, we've had enough of the mullahs, we've had enough of this theocracy, we want to be free, and it could be happening. And I think we ought to do everything in America's power, at least behind the scenes, to foment regime change in that country, because it's just, the people have been suffering long enough, and it's time now for freedom. And freedom wants to break out in Iran, and it will be a marvelous thing if it happens. Well, I mentioned earlier the arrogance, the utter arrogance of a federal district judge ordering a president to do something in relation to immigration. And here's that story. Here's Charlene.
That's right, Pat. A California federal judge has ordered immigration officials to reunite separated families within 30 days. The order stated children younger than 5 must be reunited within 14 days. And the judge also issued a nationwide injunction on future family separations. And today, the House is set to vote on a compromise immigration bill, but it is not expected to pass. In a related development, the owner of that Red Hen restaurant who asked White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders to leave is resigning from a local business. Stephanie Wilkinson had been executive director of Main Street Lexington, and her restaurant is also closed until July 5th. Well, the federal debt is on course to reach its highest level ever compared to the overall economy. The Congressional Budget Office predicts that in 10 years, the national debt will be as big as the total annual output for the entire economy. And by 2048, the debt will amount to more than 150% of the GDP. And that's far higher than the previous record, which was set in 1946 after World War II. Some economists worry that such a high debt level could be a drag on economic growth. Pat?
Well, it's not going to be a drag. It's going to kill economic growth, because what will happen is the debt will be so high. Debt service, you know, if they bring the interest rates up to prevailing standards, they've been going along at a 1% or less than 1% interest rate. Now we're looking at possibly 3, 4, 5% interest. You start charging that on the national debt and start paying it off, there won't be any money left for anything except possibly national defense. There won't be any money for any services by the federal government. That debt will be all-consuming. And folks, it's time the people in office began to realize how dangerous this increasing debt will be. And the thing that I've been concerned about, the dollar is a reserve currency of the world. If we ever lose our status as the reserve currency, you see, we can print dollars if we want to, because everybody's got to take them. It's the reserve currency. But if all of a sudden the Chinese and the Russians and the Germans and the French start saying, we don't want these things any longer, we want euros, we want a basket of currencies, we want the yuan from China, we want something else. If they begin to look for that and they ask for gold-backed currency, the United States will be in, you have no idea how it's going to affect you. It'll destroy the economy, and it will bring poverty to this great nation. We will beggar ourselves because of this increasing debt. So when debt exceeds your gross domestic product, you've got a serious problem. And I hate to say it, but none of the leaders that I'm aware of in this country are really addressing it. And if anybody does, he's sort of voted down. You know, he's not thinking positively. Well, I think positive is that you get your house in order, and it's got to be done.